died. It was terrible. I still have a heartache that it ended so badly, this wonderful thing that Joyce DeWitt to this day doesn't talk to me.
At 79 years old, Joyce DeWitt has finally broken her silence about one of television's most famous rifts. For decades, fans of Three's Company could only guess at what really happened between her and co-star Suzanne Somers. On screen, they were inseparable as Janet and Chrissy. Off-screen, whispers of contract battles, tense sets, and shattered friendships swirled. For years, Joyce avoided the subject entirely, never confirming, never denying, and never letting her side be told. But now, she has decided to reveal the truth about what drove them apart, what it cost her personally, and how it changed the course of one of the most beloved sitcoms in history. And what she says might not be the story you have been expecting. When Three's Company premiered in 1977, it was unlike anything else on television. The premise was simple, but daring for its time. Two women and a man sharing an apartment, with misunderstandings and comedic tension driving each episode. Joyce DeWitt stepped into the role of Janet Wood, the practical, level-headed brunette who often acted as the voice of reason. Suzanne Somers played Chrissy Snow, the bubbly blonde with a knack for delivering perfectly timed and often hilariously naive one-liners. Together with John Ritter's physical comedy as Jack Tripper, the chemistry was electric. Behind the scenes in those early days, the three leads were more than just co-workers. They rehearsed together, spent downtime on set chatting about life, and shared in the thrill of seeing the show's ratings climb. By the end of the first season, Three's Company was a cultural phenomenon, pulling in millions of viewers each week. Magazine covers, late-night appearances, and fan letters poured in, cementing the trio as one of television's most beloved casts. That early camaraderie was genuine. Joyce often spoke of how she respected Suzanne's comedic instincts, while Suzanne publicly praised Joyce's sharp timing and grounded presence. John Ritter, ever the peacemaker, seemed to bring out the best in both. The set had a rhythm, playful banter between takes, collaborative brainstorming during rehearsals, and mutual encouragement as they navigated the sudden pressures of fame. It was a golden period where success seemed to bind them together, but television history has shown that rapid fame can be as volatile as it is exhilarating. With every boost in ratings came more media attention, more public appearances, and more conversations about what each star was worth, not just to the audience, but to the network. In those early years, there was no sign that this trio's bond would fracture. To anyone looking in, they seemed like a perfectly matched team, destined to ride the wave of success together. Yet, behind the smiles and press interviews, the seeds of future conflict were quietly being planted. They would not sprout until money entered the conversation in a way that would test friendships, loyalty, and the very future of the show. And when it did, the fallout would be unlike anything fans had imagined. By the dawn of the fifth season, Three's Company was no longer just a hit sitcom. It was a ratings powerhouse. Millions tuned in every week. Advertisers were paying top dollar for commercial slots, and the network was raking in profits. But while the audience saw nothing but laughs, behind the curtain, a different drama was unfolding, one that would set the stage for one of television's most infamous behind-the-scenes conflicts. Suzanne Somers, who had become the breakout star thanks to her portrayal of Chrissy Snow, decided it was time to renegotiate her contract. At the time, she was making $30,000 per episode, a respectable sum in the late 1970s, but far less than what male leads of similar hit shows were earning. She and her husband, Alan Hamill, who acted as her manager, believed her contribution to the show warranted a dramatic pay increase to $150,000 per episode, plus 10% of the show's profits. This was a bold move, especially considering the era and the network's history with contract disputes. For Joyce DeWitt, the request was a shock. Her own philosophy toward acting had always been rooted in the craft, not the business. She had a favored nations clause in her contract, meaning that if one cast member's pay was raised, the others would match. While this clause protected her from being left behind financially, Joyce saw the size of Suzanne's demand as a dangerous gamble. In her eyes, such a push could put the entire show's future at risk. The network, ABC, responded with swift resistance. Rather than renegotiate under pressure, executives decided to make an example out of Suzanne. What followed was a high-stakes standoff. The tension spilled onto the set, not through shouting matches or public confrontations, but through a noticeable change in the atmosphere. Where there had once been easy laughter, there was now a cautious distance. For John Ritter, who was close to both women, the conflict put him in an impossible position. He tried to remain neutral, avoiding public statements, and doing his best to keep the work moving forward. Joyce, however, could not help but feel that Suzanne's approach was transforming their once tight-knit cast into a fractured group where business and personal relationships no longer aligned. What had begun as a conversation about fair pay and recognition had now evolved into a philosophical divide. Was acting a craft to be nurtured for its own sake, or was it a business where leverage should be used to secure the best possible deal? For Suzanne, it was the latter. For Joyce, it was not so clear-cut, and soon the conflict would escalate beyond negotiations, spilling directly into the structure of the show itself and into the way the cast would interact from that point forward. When Suzanne Somers' contract dispute with ABC reached its peak, the network took decisive action, not by meeting her demands, but by effectively pushing her to the fringes of the show. What followed was a strategy that television fans had never really seen before. Suzanne was not officially fired right away, but she was removed from the main dynamic that made Three's Company so successful. During the final season she appeared, her screen time was slashed to just a few minutes per episode. In most cases, her character, Chrissy Snow, was shown on the phone in a separate location, speaking with Janet or Jack. These scenes were filmed entirely apart from the rest of the cast. Suzanne would arrive on set, escorted by a security guard, quickly shoot her lines with only a crew member reading the other side of the conversation, and leave without seeing Joyce DeWitt or John Ritter at all. It was an unusual and highly visible punishment. Fans began to notice that Chrissy was barely present, and rumors about a feud swirled in the tabloids. For those inside the production, the isolation was undeniable. What had once been a lively, collaborative set now felt fractured. Cast and crew who had spent years building chemistry were forced to work around an invisible wall. For Joyce, this was more than awkward. It was disheartening. She had built her career believing that ensemble work thrived on trust and constant interaction. Watching a co-star be physically removed from that process changed the energy entirely. The easy rhythm they had enjoyed in earlier seasons was gone. Now, there were unspoken rules about what could be discussed, where people could stand, and even when certain cast members could be on set. John Ritter tried to maintain professionalism, delivering strong performances despite the awkward logistics, but even he could not fully bridge the gap. The scripts themselves began to change, with new characters introduced to fill the comedic void left by Chrissy's absence. The once tight trio that had carried the show from day one was no longer the same. Behind closed doors, Joyce and Suzanne were not speaking at all. Not a quick hello, not a passing word, nothing. And while neither of them publicly attacked the other at the time, the silence between them was as much a statement as anything they could have said. For viewers, the change in tone was subtle at first. For those inside the studio, the separation was like a shadow hanging over every rehearsal and every taping. What had started as a business negotiation had now transformed into an emotional and physical divide that would not heal for decades. And after the final phone scene was filmed, the distance between Joyce and Suzanne would only grow wider, stretching into years without a single word exchanged. When Suzanne Somers' final appearance on Three's Company aired in 1981, the official line was that Chrissy Snow had moved back home to care for her mother. The truth was far less warm. Behind the scenes, the contract dispute had reached a permanent stalemate, and Suzanne's time on the show was over. She stepped away. And with her departure came an even deeper silence between her and Joyce DeWitt, one that would last for decades. For the next 30 years, the two women did not speak. Not a phone call, not a letter, not even a chance encounter at industry events. Both moved forward with their lives, but the shadow of Three's Company was always there. Whenever the show was mentioned in interviews, journalists inevitably asked about the feud. Joyce's answers were measured. She often deflected, saying she preferred to keep her private life private. Suzanne, on the other hand, was more open about the business disagreement, but still avoided making personal attacks. Still, that did not stop the press from painting their story as a bitter grudge. Tabloids ran headlines about on-set betrayal and lifelong enemies, fueling speculation among fans. In reality, both women were busy with new projects, Joyce with theater and occasional television roles, Suzanne with books, talk shows, and her own line of health and beauty products. Yet the unresolved history lingered like an unfinished chapter neither was willing to write. John Ritter remained a connection between them in a strange, unspoken way. He maintained friendships with both women separately, but never managed to bring them back together. His sudden passing in 2003 was a devastating blow to both, and though it stirred old emotions, it was not enough to bridge the gap. If anything, the years that followed only made the distance feel more permanent. Fans often speculated about why Joyce and Suzanne never reconciled sooner. Some believed pride was the barrier. Others thought the wounds from the business fallout were simply too deep. The truth was more complicated. Two women with different philosophies about work and loyalty, both shaped by an industry that often pits co-stars against each other. And then, in 2012, something happened that no one could have predicted. After 3 decades of silence, a surprising invitation would bring them face to face once again, live in front of an audience, and change the narrative of their relationship forever. In early 2012, Suzanne Somers was hosting her own online talk show, Breaking Through, a platform where she discussed health, relationships, and the lessons she had learned from her career. It was casual, conversational, and very different from the sitcom world that had first made her famous. One day, she made a decision that would surprise even her most devoted fans. She reached out to Joyce DeWitt with an invitation to appear on the show. At first, Joyce hesitated. 3 decades of silence is not something easily undone with a single phone call. There was no guarantee the meeting would be comfortable, let alone warm. But something in the tone of Suzanne's request suggested sincerity. Suzanne explained that she wanted to clear the air, to finally address the tension that had defined the way fans remembered their time together. Perhaps it was age, perspective, or the realization that life is too short to let old wounds fester. But Joyce agreed. When the day came, the audience watching online knew they were about to see something rare. As Joyce walked onto the set, Suzanne stood up immediately. There was no scripted awkwardness, no manufactured tension for the sake of drama. They hugged, long and genuine. For viewers, that simple embrace was more powerful than any explanation. It was the first time they had been in the same room, face to face, since 1981. The conversation that followed was honest, but gentle. Suzanne spoke first, acknowledging that the conflict had never been personal in her eyes, but rather a matter of business and self-worth. She admitted that her approach back then had been aggressive, even confrontational, and that she understood how it might have alienated her co-stars. She told Joyce she wished she had handled things differently, especially in light of how much she valued their early friendship. Joyce, in turn, shared her own perspective. For her, the issue was never about Suzanne asking for more money. It was about the way the process unfolded. The set had once been a place of trust and collaboration, and seeing it disrupted so suddenly was painful. She admitted that at the time, she did not fully understand Suzanne's position, and that communication between them had broken down almost immediately after the negotiations began. Neither woman denied that the years apart had been a loss. Both expressed regret, not just for the friendship that had ended, but for the joy they could have shared in celebrating the show's legacy together. As the interview unfolded, there were moments of laughter as they recalled old scenes, John Ritter's legendary pranks, and the energy of those early days when everything still felt new. For fans, the exchange was emotional. It was closure, something that seemed impossible after so many years of silence. The public feud, which had been dissected and exaggerated for decades, suddenly looked very different when filtered through the lens of 2 women in their 60s, both willing to acknowledge their part in the divide and move forward. By the end of the segment, there was no mistaking the change between them. The wall that had separated Janet Wood and Chrissy Snow's real-life counterparts was gone. They walked off the set together, smiling, the bitterness replaced with a quiet understanding that could only come with time. But while the moment closed a painful chapter, Joyce still had one more revelation in the years ahead, an insight into what the feud had truly cost her, and what she had finally come to understand about it as she approached 79 years old. By the time Joyce DeWitt reached 79 years old, her perspective on the Three's Company years had shifted dramatically. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, and for Joyce, the decades since the feud had been filled with personal growth, theater work, charitable causes, and a deliberate choice to step away from the spotlight. She had lived a quieter life than Suzanne, rarely seeking media attention, but that did not mean the questions ever stopped. Interviews, fan encounters, and public appearances almost always came back to one topic: what really happened with Suzanne Somers? For years, Joyce gave polite but careful answers. She preferred to protect the privacy of everyone involved, and perhaps to protect herself from reopening old wounds. But as she entered her late 70s, she began to speak with a new openness. In rare public reflections, she admitted that the experience had taken a heavier emotional toll than she had acknowledged at the time. It was not just about losing a co-star, it was about losing the sense of family that had made those first years on the show so special. Joyce revealed that the fracture had changed the way she viewed the industry entirely. She had gone into Three's Company with the belief that if you worked hard, treated your colleagues well, and focused on the work itself, that mutual respect would protect you from the more cutthroat side of Hollywood. The contract dispute shattered that illusion. Suddenly, she understood how quickly relationships could be strained or even destroyed when money and power entered the equation. She also spoke about the personal impact. In those years following Suzanne's departure, Joyce kept her focus on the show, but privately, she carried the weight of unfinished conversations and unspoken feelings. She admitted that she had missed Suzanne, not just the character of Chrissy, but the woman she had once laughed with between takes. Yet in the whirlwind of production schedules and media attention, she did not know how to reach across that divide without reopening the conflict. Looking back, Joyce acknowledged that both she and Suzanne were navigating pressures that outsiders could not see. Suzanne was fighting for recognition and equality in a business where women were often undervalued. Joyce was trying to preserve the harmony of a creative environment she deeply loved. Neither was entirely wrong, but their inability to truly talk about it at the time allowed the silence to grow into a chasm. Her later life reflections carried a tone of gratitude as well. Joyce expressed that their reconciliation in 2012 had lifted a burden she had carried for over 30 years. She described feeling lighter, freer, knowing they had finally been able to look each other in the eye and acknowledge both the hurt and the good. When Suzanne passed away in 2023, Joyce's statements were heartfelt and unguarded. She called Suzanne a true and beautiful friend and said she was grateful for the time they had shared, both on and off the set. To fans who had followed the story for decades, Joyce's words at 79 were a reminder that the truth behind a feud is rarely one-sided. It is a tapestry woven from personal ambitions, misunderstandings, industry politics, and the complicated nature of human relationships. And for Joyce, the lesson was simple but profound. Fame fades, shows end, but the way you treat people, both in the moment and years later, will stay with you for life. Looking back now, the story of Joyce DeWitt and Suzanne Somers is not just about two actresses caught in a contract dispute. It is about the way success can both unite and divide, and how the choices made in the pressure of the moment can echo across decades. For fans, Three's Company will always be remembered for its quick-witted humor, the slapstick genius of John Ritter, and the irresistible chemistry between Janet, Chrissy, and Jack. But for the people who lived it, the off-screen story was every bit as dramatic as what the audience saw on Thursday nights. Joyce's reflections at 79 cut through years of speculation and myth. They show that, in the end, the truth was not a single explosive revelation, but a layered understanding of how friendships can be tested in ways no one anticipates. She acknowledged the pain, the misunderstandings, and the pride that kept them apart for so long. But she also recognized the shared joy, respect, and gratitude that remained beneath it all. The reconciliation in 2012 was not just a media moment. It was a deeply personal act of closure. It allowed two women to reclaim the bond they had lost, and to rewrite how their story would be remembered. It also served as a quiet lesson for anyone watching that even the most public, long-standing rifts can be healed, and that it is never too late to say the words you have held back. In Hollywood, where egos often overshadow empathy, Joyce and Suzanne's final chapter stands out for its honesty and humanity. It reminds us that while fame may be fleeting, forgiveness has no expiration date. And as Joyce herself now knows, sometimes the greatest legacy you can leave is not the work that made you famous, but the relationships you choose to mend along the way.